As the saying goes, there is always a rainbow after the rain. However, what if that hopeful rainbow turns out to be a more significant tragedy in disguise? In today's movie recap, a group of friends faces devastation from a powerful storm. When they spot a rescue ship approaching, their spirits lift. Little do they realize that the rescue ship harbors a greater danger than the storm itself. A woman named Jess cries while embracing her son Tommy. She consoles Tommy, saying that it's just a bad dream, and he has nothing to fear. That day, Jess takes care of the house, cleaning up spilled paint. While cleaning, she accidentally gets her attire dirty. Suddenly, she hurriedly packs and organizes clothes in the car's compartment. Afterward, Jess takes her son, and they leave by riding a car. At the yacht, Sally's group arrives, warmly welcomed by Greg. Sally is accompanied by her husband, Downey, and friend, Heather. Lastly, the other two companions, Victor and Jess, arrive. Greg warmly greets Jess, asking if she's okay. It's noticeable that Jess is disoriented and not herself. Strangely, Tommy is not with her. As they all boarded the yacht, they began to navigate the open sea. During the journey, Jess woke up from a dream of lying on the seashore. Heather noticed Jess having a nightmare, so she comforted her. Jess openly shared that she had a bad dream but couldn't recall the details. On the upper deck of the yacht, Greg asked Victor if Jess was okay. Victor mentioned asking Jess about Tommy, and Jess explained that he was at school. However, since it was Saturday, Greg found it peculiar. Greg defended Jess, mentioning that Tommy is a special child, so their school might operate on Saturdays. Shortly after, Jess joined Heather on the upper deck. Greg, seemingly interested in Jess, bonded with her and let her experience the steering wheel. In the background, Sally continued to encourage Heather to pursue Greg and insulted Jess. Later on, Victor raised the mainsail to boost their sailing speed. During their conversation, Greg tells Jess that he invited her yesterday because he wants to spend time with her. However, Jess seems confused, having no memories of what Greg is saying. A few moments later, the wind suddenly stops, surprising both Victor and Greg as it's the first time they've experienced such a sudden halt. To worsen the situation, a dark cloud approaches their location. Greg becomes alarmed and quickly calls the Coast Guard for assistance. While communicating via radio, the Coast Guard side suddenly becomes static. Creepily enough, they hear a woman's voice asking for help, mentioning that there is a murderer on their ship. Hearing this, Greg asks for their coordinates, but the woman stops responding. He tries reaching her several times, but she doesn't reply again. Out of concern, Heather calls Greg's attention to the approaching strong storm in their location. Later on, the storm hits them, and their yacht is battered by powerful waves. On the upper deck, Vic and Greg attempt to control the yacht, but the fierce storm results in its destruction. The five of them manage to survive the great storm, except Heather, who becomes separated from them. They try to locate Heather, but she is nowhere to be found. Later that day, while mourning Heather's disappearance, they suddenly spot a large ship sailing towards them. They capture its attention by waving and shouting. On the ship's upper deck, they see a silhouette of a person peering at them. The group swiftly moves to the ship, even though Jess has an uneasy feeling about it. Strangely, they found no one on the ship, causing Jess to feel more uneasy and anxious. With no one responding or welcoming them, their group decided to head to the bridge to speak with the ship's captain. Jess, lost in thought as if remembering something, is approached by Greg for comfort. Inside, they pass through a hallway filled with identical rooms. At one intersection, Jess reflects, noting a sense of familiarity. Greg explains that rooms on liners are often similar. In a part of the ship, they come across an old picture dated 1932 that strongly resembles the ship, leaving them confused. While discussing the ship's name, they hear a key dropping from a distance, capturing their attention. They quickly check its origin. Eventually, they found a key on the floor, and Jess is shocked to see that it's her own key. Everyone is puzzled, thinking Jess might be playing a prank, so she shows them the locket containing Tommy's picture. Sally suggests that Heather might have dropped it, but Downey isn't convinced. In the main dining room, despite being empty of people, there's an abundance of food on the table. Victor starts eating, and Greg asks the time. Victor says it's 11:30, but Jess and the ship's wall clock show it's only 8:17. Sally continues searching for Heather by calling her, but Greg stops her and instructs the group on their next steps. During the discussion, Jess sees someone in the distance who quickly hides. Without hesitation, Victor follows what Jess saw. Sally asked Jess if she saw Heather, but Jess didn't get a clear view. When Greg returned, Jess accompanied him to find a way off the ship, leaving the couple in the main dining room. While walking, Jess warned Greg about the danger Victor might be in, but Greg didn't pay much attention, leading them into an open room. Inside, they found words written in blood on the mirror, saying, "Go to the theater." Meanwhile, Victor continued roaming around to find the mysterious person. Going back, Greg dismissed what they saw, suggesting it might be a prank by the ship's crew. However, convinced something supernatural was happening, Jess decided to part ways with Greg to search for a boat to escape. While Sally and Downey were walking, they noticed bloodstains along their path. Sally followed them until they reached the theater. Jess returned to the main dining room to regroup with the couple, but they were gone when she arrived. Strangely, Jess observed that the food on the table was decaying. Shortly after, she heard a sound in the distance, so she hid behind one of the pillars. Victor appeared, fatally injured and covered in blood. As he approached, Jess tried to help him. Surprisingly, Victor suddenly strangled Jess until she lay on the floor. With no other option, Jess touched the back of his head and pressed her fingers against the wound. As a result, Victor lay down and eventually died. Shortly after, Jess heard a gunshot from the theater, prompting her to quickly go there. Upon entering, Jess saw Greg with a gunshot wound. However, she was surprised when Sally confronted her and blamed her for shooting Greg. Confused, Jess explained that she was with Victor, who was also attacked. This only fueled Sally and Downey's belief that Jess was behind everything. While accusing and ganging up on Jess, someone suddenly shot them. Up in the theater, Jess saw the murderer wearing a cloth on their head. The murderer shot Downey again, ending his life. Sally became hysterical, making her an easy target for the murderer. With no other option, Jess ran out, abandoning her companions. The murderer attempted to shoot her but missed. In the kitchen, Jess grabbed a knife and hid behind a stove. Luckily, the murderer didn't see her and left. After its departure, Jess searched for a way out and upon exiting, realized there were no extra rescue boats. While searching for a way out, the murderer suddenly struck Jess with the gun from behind. Crawling to face the murderer, Jess pleaded not to be shot. Strangely, the murderer hesitated to shoot her. Seizing the opportunity, Jess deflected the gun muzzle. She managed to overcome the murderer in close quarters and escaped by descending to the lower floor, reminiscent of Tomb Raider. The murderer continued to pursue her, but its shots went astray. Running out of bullets, the murderer threw the gun at Jess. Upon reaching the lower floor, Jess grabbed a fire axe and rolled a round metal object to confuse the murderer. However, it knew her location. Luckily, Jess sensed it quickly, allowing her to outmaneuver the murderer. They engaged in a struggle, and eventually, Jess overpowered the murderer who begged her to listen. Jess noticed the voice was female, stating that she needed to kill them all. Ignoring the plea, Jess swung the axe, and the murderer fell. Overwhelmed by the intensity of her experiences, Jess stood in bewilderment. Inside the bridge, she heard repetitive music and entered to find a turntable. Adjusting it to rewind and play again, she gazed at the mirror and heard cries for help from outside. To her astonishment, she saw her group, including herself, on top of the overturned yacht. This time, Jess was on the upper part of the ship, the opposite of their initial observation. Confused about what was happening, she freaked out when the new group entered, prompting her to hide. While in hiding, Jess heard the new Jess repeating the exact words she said when she first arrived on the ship. They replicated everything the former group did, leaving Jess unable to comprehend the events. Frustrated, she repeated the same action as the murderer, dropping the key on the floor. The new group heard it, prompting Jess to run and hide from them. While walking away, Jess heard the tap running in the room she and Greg entered the last time. Confused by the unfolding events, she chose to hide. Repeating the same event, the new Jess saw her, and this time, the original Jess played the role of the murderer. Outside, Jess observed seagulls feasting on Downey's corpse. She descended to get a closer look. Suddenly, she heard Victor shouting hello, searching for someone. When Victor spotted her, he was surprised, unaware that there were two Jess. Jess quickly explained the situation to Victor, but he remained unconvinced. She tried to show Victor the bird-eaten corpse, but when he looked, the body vanished like a bubble. Due to these events, Victor thought Jess was losing her mind. As he was leaving, Jess tried to explain, but Victor refused to listen. Driven by her eagerness for Victor to understand, she accidentally pushed him onto a sharp metal object, causing a dangerous wound on his head. Instead of helping Victor, Jess panicked and left, mimicking the actions of the murderer. In another part of the ship, she overheard Greg and the new Jess talking. In the locker room, Jess struggled as voices echoed in her head. Looking at her feet, she saw crumpled papers with the same message: if they aboard, kill them all. Similarly, Jess wrote the same content, influenced by voices in her mind urging her to do so. Afterwards, she went to the adjacent room and grabbed a shotgun rifle. The voices in her head persisted, so she cursed at them to stop. While seated, she noticed the locket with her son's picture hanging from a drainage pipe. As she picked it up, she realized there were multiple lockets below. Shocked, she dropped it, adding to the many lockets that fell. Seeing this, Jess began to understand that she was stuck in a loop. Remembering Tommy, Jess took shotgun shells from a box while walking, searching for a solution to break the loop. Jess encountered bleeding Victor, explaining that she didn't mean to hurt him. They approached the dining room where the new Jess was. Mimicking Jess's previous actions, the new Jess did the same. So, Jess seized the opportunity to break the loop by appearing at the same time. Finally, Victor believed Jess, witnessing two Jess in front of him. Jess pointed the gun at the new Jess, but couldn't bring herself to shoot. While talking to Victor, Jess suddenly heard a gunshot. In the theater, she found Greg fatally wounded. The couple blamed her again, seeing she had a gun. Ignoring them, she immediately pushed Sally to avoid the shot from the murderer. Eventually, the couple believed Jess, realizing she saved them. Jess changed the pattern, but a new murderer emerged. Jess attempted to explain the situation to them, but they wanted a rational explanation. Seeing that rationality wouldn't make a difference, Jess handed the shotgun rifle to Downey, advising him not to trust anyone. Jess returned to the main dining room to find Victor gone. She followed the blood drops, leading her outside, suspecting Victor might have fallen from the ship. Meanwhile, Downey shot at the hallway upon hearing movement. The murderer, revealing another Jess, removed her mask, pretending to be the original Jess. Downey initially suspected the bloody Jess, but she eventually convinced him. Jess went back to Downey's location, but they were no longer there. She screamed to get their attention, but the bloody Jess told them to ignore it and follow her. The two followed the bloody Jess into a room, unaware of the tragic fate awaiting them. Jess slashed Downey and stabbed him multiple times. Before Sally could run, the bloody Jess stabbed her. Jess rushed to them upon hearing Sally scream, but Sally thought she was the murderer, fleeing and hiding from her. In the radio room, Sally called for help, repeating the exact words Greg heard on the radio at the beginning. Before hearing Greg's response, she left as she sensed Jess approaching. Jess heard Greg speaking on the other line and tried to communicate, but he couldn't hear her. Upon going upstairs, Jess was shocked to see multiple dead Sallys. Despite this, the wounded Sally lay beside them. Jess attempted to comfort Sally, but she no longer trusted her, thinking Jess had a loose screw. Below them, Jess witnessed the new Jess killing the bloody Jess. She told Sally she would come back and asked her to wait, but Sally succumbed to blood loss shortly after. Upon hearing another batch, Jess hurriedly descended to check their sinking boat, mirroring the fate of those she had witnessed before. Desperate, Jess had an idea and went to the ship's engines, vigorously trying to manipulate and sabotage them one by one, relentlessly smashing and attempting to damage them, but still, the ship remained unaffected. Later that day, Jess once again saw another version of herself talking to Victor. As before, she tried to convince him, accidentally pushing him into a sharp object, causing him to bleed. After the lookalike left, Jess went upstairs to talk to Victor again. She reassured him not to be afraid, claiming she could save him and knew how. Then, she left Victor and went up, finding former Downey's corpse lying and bloody. She dragged Downey's corpse out of the bathroom and used the former Downey's blood to write a warning in the bathroom. She disposed of the bodies of the former Downey and former Greg in the sea, and went to talk to the latest Downey and latest Sally. Downey asked Jess about Greg, and she told them that Greg had instructed them to go to the theater. Meanwhile, she went downstairs to get a gun and clothes, covering her face and approaching their friends. She saw another new version of herself, walking out of the conversation with Greg. She followed Greg to the theater and pointed a gun at him. Greg tried to calm Jess, explaining that they had just arrived on the ship, walking around with no one else, and they could leave. While calming her down, Greg noticed the shoes Jess was wearing, recognizing that it was indeed herself. Greg, puzzled, asked Jess what she was doing, and she replied that she didn't want Greg to see her face. Jess expressed her desire for the duplicates to die, creating a new loop. She planned to wait for them downstairs and prevent them from entering the ship. After explaining, she apologized and shot Greg, causing him to plummet downward. Sally and Downey witnessed the chaotic scene, screaming in shock as Jess started shooting at them. However, the new Jess managed to escape, and when the original Jess attempted to shoot her, she skillfully avoided the gunfire. A struggle ensued as the two Jess grappled with each other, with the original Jess chasing the new one and firing bullets. In a surprising turn of events, the cycle reversed, and the original Jess found herself in the position of the bloody Jess. The new Jess managed to escape again, and they clashed once more. However, similar to the initial encounter, the original Jess couldn't overpower the new one. She informed the new Jess that she needed to kill her companions to go home, and the original Jess fell into the sea. The original Jess woke up on an island, explored it, and reached a road where vehicles passed by. Jess ran home, and upon arriving, she peeked through the window and saw her son, Tommy, painting. However, she became puzzled when she suddenly heard herself. She observed her other self taking down laundry, just as she did before leaving, scolding her son in the process. Tommy accidentally knocked over his paint cup, mirroring the earlier incident. Jess slapped him again and cleaned up the spilled paint. Witnessing this, Jess became furious. She rang the doorbell, fetched a hammer from the backyard, and unhesitatingly struck her other self with it. Tommy witnessed this, feeling scared, so she comforted him, similar to how she comforted him at the beginning. Devastated, Jess immediately drives towards the triangular yacht to reunite with Greg and the others. While on the way, Jess accidentally hits a seagull, so she tosses it onto the seashore. As she looks at it, she notices several dead seagulls in the same area, indicating that the loop is starting again, and she has not escaped it yet. She returns to the car and continues driving. Due to blood on the windshield, Tommy panics. Jess tries to calm him, but it's too late for her to react as they collide with a truck. Unfortunately, Tommy dies in the accident, and Jess is injured. From a distance, she stands, gazing at the tragedy. Behind her, a taxi driver approaches, telling her that there's nothing anyone can do to bring back her child. The taxi driver took her to the harbor, and upon arrival, she encountered Victor walking towards the yacht. He asked about Tommy's whereabouts, and Jess, stuck in the loop, lied, saying her son was at school. Jess with no memories of what happened. The same loop unfolds once again. Greg greets her, and she boards the yacht. Their group prepares to sail, oblivious to the recurring tragedy they are about to face, and the movie concludes.